In this video, I'm going to give you my tips and tricks for dealing with mealybugs. Mealybugs are really pesky plant pests. Say that 10 times fast. They are scale insects that feed on the juices of your plants, and it really causes them failure to thrive. They're usually found right in the crevices where the leaf meets the stem on plants, and they can be on your indoor house plants or on outdoor garden plants as well. They don't always necessarily kill a plant, but they do certainly cause some damage. If it's a young, new plant, it certainly could kill it if it gets overwhelmed with them. But the main thing is that it just really impedes growth. It makes leaves go a little bit misshapen. It can just cause a lot of harm to your plant if you don't deal with it. They are flightless insects, so that means they travel from plant to plant if they're nearby. This is my favorite plant, string of turtles. It's got lots of little nooks and crannies, and that's what they do. They are really good at hiding inside the nooks and crannies of plants and feed away at them. They also like conditions that are warm and moist. So again, with house plants and tropical plants, those are the ideal growing conditions. So unfortunately, it's also the ideal conditions for mealybugs to grow and just completely take over. But luckily, dealing with mealybugs, there's really simple ways to deal with them with household items that you often have at hand. So my first tip is, when you find a plant that maybe isn't doing so well, have a look under and around the leaves, and this is often when you can spot the mealybugs. Have a really good look around. They are kind of white and fuzzy. They look like little scale insects. They almost look like little weird prehistoric fuzzy white insects. So sometimes they create like a little powdery look, or what looks like a tiny bit of cotton on your plant, and that is often a sign of mealybugs. That said, if you do see a bug that looks like this, kind of like a giant mealybug, a mealybug on steroids, shall we say, those are actually mealybug eaters. I'm not saying to purchase them. I don't think I've ever seen them purchased, but if you do see them in your area, they're not mealybugs, they're mealybug eaters, and that's a good thing. You do want those. They're related to the ladybug, and they specifically love to eat mealybugs. Of course, the fact that they look very much like mealybugs is very confusing and kind of bad for them, but if you see those, keep them or move them to an infected plant, but don't kill them. And really, 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 I implore you, do not purchase carnivorous insects to take care of your plant pest problem. So one of the first steps when dealing with mealybugs is to really examine your plant closely. This is my string of turtles. I don't like to play favorites, but I have to say, I think this is my favorite plant. I propagated it from just a couple of tiny stems. I did a whole video about propagating this plant. I'll have to do a follow-up because it is just so happy, except when you take a really good look, there you go. We've got some mealybugs, and that is a moving, here you go. I don't know if you can, so there it is. That is a mealybug right there. But from the outside, this plant, aside from those little dots, it looks pretty good. But I did notice there's some yellowing of leaves. Some of the leaves were kind of going a little bit misshapen. So if we take a good look at this plant, you'll see this is a perfect example. This leaf is looking misshapen, smaller than the other ones, and sure enough, there is that kind of telltale white fluff there. All those little teeny tiny white dots, those are really small mealybugs. Like there's one right there, just chilling. There we go. Here's where you can really see the way they just hang out. Now the mealybugs on this particular plant are pretty small. Like here's one right there. You might even be able to see it. Do you see it crawling? It's really important to go through and really take a look under the leaves and in all the little nooks and crannies. because these guys really love to hide. Another surefire way that you know that you have mealybugs, especially on outside plants, I have a lot of succulents and they are often infested with mealybugs. And one surefire way that you know you've got a mealybug problem is ants. Ants do tend to sort of farm the mealybugs. Similar to aphids, they produce what's called honeydew, which the ants like to eat. And so ants hang around where mealybugs are as well. So if you see a lot of ants hanging around a plant, have a look for mealybugs and treat it accordingly. So here are some of the tools that I use to get rid of mealybugs. And I should note, this is an ongoing process. It's not like a one and done. You always have to kind of be on the lookout because they may have laid eggs in the soil. They may be on other plants. They're so tiny, it's really hard to make sure you got them completely. So it is just really good to make sure you're always kind of on the lookout. You know, when you're doing your usual houseplant or garden routine, just be aware and really look for them. So my first recommendation with tools to have on hand, isopropyl alcohol. Now, isopropyl alcohol. I use 70% isopropyl alcohol, and that is just like how much of the formula has alcohol in it versus water. You can get a higher rating of this, and if you do, I recommend that you do mix it with water. But for me, I usually do have this on hand. In this post-COVID world, we've all gotten very used to having isopropyl alcohol on hand, as it is an antiseptic. If you're familiar with isopropyl alcohol, you'll know that it has a really fast drying factor, right? So that's what actually kills the mealybugs. This alcohol dries out their exoskeleton. So they basically just dry up and die when they come into contact with isopropyl alcohol. This bottle, I'm just gonna take this off. I leave this outside in my garden station because I use it so much for gardening. This is my kind of garden one that I have. So obviously it's been outside. The elements are making the label fall off. You can get this at any pharmacy. This one in particular, I think I got at the grocery store. I've also heard a tip, I haven't tried it myself, that some pharmacies, including CVS, are selling wintergreen isopropyl alcohol, which I guess is probably better for us if we're putting it in hand sanitizer as far as smell. It's a very dark green, and apparently it's even more effective at getting rid of mealybugs. So that's one thing I'm gonna have to try. TikTok told me about it. As mentioned, so there's different levels of isopropyl alcohol. 70% is the one I usually go for because it does have, it's strong enough to deal with the problem at hand, but it's not so harsh that it will kill the plant. So the other tools I usually have on hand are a small paintbrush. You could also have a larger paintbrush, cotton buds or cotton balls. I also use this, came with a succulent set. It just is kind of an air blower. Great for if you're potting things up and you want to move dirt out of the way. Tweezers can be really helpful. If you find a particularly big mealybug, you can literally pull it off. And this is a general spray bottle and a measuring cup. So step one for removing mealybugs, as I mentioned, 70% isopropyl alcohol. It's usually tame enough to put directly on your plant. Some plants are more sensitive than others, so kind of it is recommended to do a spot test on your plant before giving a full treatment. So this is my string of turtles. It is completely infested, and all I do is I simply put the paintbrush directly into that. And to do a little spot check, there's a spot here where there's a mealybug. Just paint that onto that leaf, making sure you get both sides in a little crevice, and leave it for a day and check that leaf. Make sure it survives. If it gets brown and dried up, you know that this is a little bit of a too strong of a solution. For me, I have tested it on this plant and I know it's an effective solution. The 70% is good. So I'm literally going to take that paintbrush and paint it all along the stems that are affected.
I'm gonna take my paintbrush. I am just gonna get rid of that one right there. And all around this plant. Every time I see one of those little white dots, you know, I'm doing this one, there you go, look at that fuzzy mealybug junk.
Some people also like using cotton buds for this same thing. This is another plant, this is a succulent, and you can kind of rub it all along. They do tend to go right where the leaf meets the stem, and rub it on the leaves itself all around to make sure that you've fully treated there could be eggs on there that are just completely invisible to the naked eye. So giving a full treatment on that leaf is going to be really effective. Alternatively, you can use a spray bottle, and I find these great for if you have a whole plant such as this one that you know is really fully infected and you might not have the time to go and do the detail work of getting every single one of these leaves. So if you're going to be doing a spray solution like that, my tip is to do a little bit of a mixture. So the mixture that I do is like a 1-to-1 ratio. So by 1-to-1, I just mean equal parts isopropyl alcohol and water. So I'm going to measure this out. I don't have a ton in here, so I've got about maybe a little bit less. I'm going to do a half a cup of the alcohol. I'm going to put it in my spray bottle. And now I'm going to measure out half a cup of water. So I've got a half a cup of isopropyl alcohol and a half a cup of water. I'm just going to mix those together. This could be tap water, it could be distilled water. It doesn't have to be distilled water. I actually have rainwater that I collected. That's what I'm using. I particularly have hard tap water, so I've found if I water or spray it on plants, it can go kind of get this like kind of crusty white thing, which I don't want. But what you do then, once you've got this in your little spray bottle, you just give it a little swish, and then you can quite simply spray your plant like that, making sure it's nice and coated.
And I'm just gonna really give this a good spray. And like I said, the tops, yeah, they're there. The soil, it's good to get the soil. That's where a lot of their eggs probably hang out. But really, most of them tend to really chill under the leaves and on the stems. So I'm just gonna give this a really good spray down, making sure, treating all, and I can even just see where those mealybugs were. So since this is a diluted version of the isopropyl alcohol, this plant is probably in pretty good hands.
Having a mixture of isopropyl alcohol and water, it's going to just dilute the solution a little bit. I can still smell it. It's still very strong alcohol smell, so you know it's strong enough to take care of the bugs, but it is diluted down so it won't cause burning on plants that are a little bit more sensitive.
Now, again, this is my favorite plant. I really don't want to wreck it. So what I might do, once I know that the mealybugs have really been taken care of, I'm going to very carefully use my tweezers to move these branches back into place. What you can also do if you're concerned about burning your plant or causing damage, what you could do when you're certain that those mealybugs have been sprayed and soaked with the isopropyl alcohol and killed, basically, you could go back and spray this with water, kind of give it a little rinse off. That's not a bad idea. You just want to make sure that the bugs have been covered first. You know, maybe let it sit for a little while.
I also recommend that after you do this treatment, you don't leave the plant in direct sunlight. Again, that's like a burn issue. It's going to dry the leaf out while it's drying the bugs out. So leave it in either the shade, or right now, this is what I call bright and direct light. I'm outdoors. We're in a kind of a covered patio, so it's pretty nice bright light, but it isn't bright, direct, hot sunlight. You can also do this same treatment with spraying, and then making sure you're doing the detail work to make sure that the spray is getting into all the little nooks and crannies of your plant to make sure that you're really getting the bugs and their eggs. So I would follow up, you know, just keep an eye on things, like follow up once a month, take a look at your plant, see if you've had any recurrences of mealybugs, and treat again as necessary. It is quite possible that they have laid eggs in the soil, so there's no harm in using your spray solution and spraying it directly into the soil as well. As mentioned, because mealybugs like kind of moist crevices that they can hide in, arrangements, especially succulent arrangements, can be particularly prone to mealybugs. So it's always wise to take any succulent arrangements that you may have and have a really good look in between each of the leaves and underneath them to make sure that you don't have any mealybug problems there.
As someone who often propagates succulent leaves, another place I always need to check is the leaf propagations themselves. Sorry, little leaf, for pulling you out of the ground, but I can see right there, I obviously need to get a better lens. There is a mealybug right there. And that is sucking away at the juices of this plant, and it's going to make it really hard for it to propagate properly. So it looks like a few of these have that issue. So if you have leaf propagations that just aren't doing anything, check them for mealybugs. It is quite possible that that is the problem. So in this case, this is where you want to do that really fine detailed work of taking your small paintbrush, dipping it directly into the isopropyl alcohol, and then just painting right where on that area where you see the mealybugs, right on the affected area, to really make sure they go away. And you can see it's almost immediate, like that mealybug is gone. And I'm gonna just take this, move the soil around, and plant it back in, and hopefully bury up those roots, and hopefully it should just recover quite well. So this is a succulent arrangement I did a couple months ago. I did what I called my rainbow succulent arrangement. It's still looking relatively healthy, but you can see there's some bits that are not looking so good. And see, this is a real sign of mealybug or other pest problems. This leaf is a little bit misshapen. These ones have this kind of crust on them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that there's mealybugs on there, even though I don't really see anything directly. But if I go ahead and use my paintbrush method, I find that is the best way to really get into those nooks and crannies without pulling off the leaves and causing too much damage. A lot of people also recommend using cotton swabs. They're fine. The reason I don't usually use them is I find they aren't detailed enough to get in between the leaves. They get really dirty, and then you have to throw them away. Whereas the paintbrush, you can just rinse it off and use it over and over and over again. However, the cotton swabs are quite good in the instance of if you're worried your plant might have some other disease or fungal infection and you don't want to transfer it from plant to plant, or you don't want to use it on a plant that you're not even sure has a problem and you don't want to transfer that problem to the other plant. So these being disposable are quite good in that sense. So if I take a good look in here, now I think this plant has a few issues going on. I think that I might have some powdery mildew. The alcohol will also help with that, but I just really want to swab this down and make sure all of that white kind of fluff is gone and completely covered up. cleaned off. And it's the succulents that are usually the hardest to get to. Like, look at that one's way under there. Those seem to be where the mealybugs like to hide the best. So again, having something that's long to really reach in there can be really helpful. Because I do see problems kind of all over this plant, the spray bottle can be really great. Getting in, that also can get into those nooks and crannies. I'm just gonna give this plant a full spray down. Same with this whole propagation tray. One thing to note as well, so this video is about mealybugs, but this same formula also tends to work pretty well on aphids. Here's Graptivaria Fred Ives propagation, looking pretty rough, and it's got some kind of nasty aphids in there. I'm gonna do the same treatment I did with the mealybugs, and I'm gonna really get in those crevices and wipe those aphids up. And this isopropyl alcohol should dry out their exoskeletons and hopefully get rid of them. So I was showing you some potted plants before. This is my little part of my succulent garden here. And I did notice, here's another trick for knowing how to spot mealybugs. These are just some like aeonium propagations I had. And if you take a look under here, hiding away, you'll notice all these ants and this weird crusty stuff. So those ants are farming the mealybugs. They are actively putting soil from the ground up here, and you can see all that little white pockets of fuzz. So this plant, you know, it's not doing too bad. It's got a lot of aerial roots, but those ants are there getting the mealybugs. So again, this is a hardy plant. Those mealybugs are not going to kill it, but I also don't want it to transfer to any of the other plants that maybe aren't quite so hardy. And so that's where this little air squirter, for lack of a better term, is pretty good. And I'm just gonna, and you can see it's kind of pushing the dirt away. And there is our little mealybug nest. Here's the back of a paintbrush. You can see that all that soil that the ants have put up there to kind of create a little mealybug haven. So I'm gonna go ahead, use my spray solution, and really spray in there to get rid of those mealybugs. And there, you can actually see on here, there's a fairly large mealybug right there walking around. You see him there. The ant's not too happy with me ruining his little mealybug farm, but they can grow pretty big. So that is it for my tips on dealing with mealybugs in a relatively natural, inexpensive, and safe way. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and of course, subscribe.